In this chapter, we're going to take a look at overriding Drupal's node template file. In the previous chapter, we looked at creating a new page template file. We did so by copying our index.html file into our theme and renaming it to page.tpl.php, and then starting to edit the file, replacing the static markup in the file with dynamic PHP variables. In this example, we'll show you how you can copy one of Drupal's existing template files into your theme and then start to make changes to that file to modify the HTML. What I'd like to do is start to modify what the actual pieces of content printed out on our site look like. As you can see right now, this is what a node looks like when it's printed onto the front page. This is an article node. Right underneath it, we've got a page node and then another article node. The title for the node, submitted by information, photos, and so forth. If we take a quick look at our mockup provided by our designer in the index.html file, you'll notice that in the design provided to us, things look a little bit different. For example, the submitted by information here is slightly grayed out, and we're listing the tags right underneath the title instead of in ours where the tags are listed under the content. You'll also notice that the read more and link to the number of comments, or where you can fill out comments for this particular article, are outlined in a light gray box. If we take a look at the actual source code for this file and examine what one of these posts look like inside of the index.html file right here, we can start to get an idea for how the markup for this needs to look in our Drupal site in order for the CSS to apply to it appropriately. We need a div with a class equal to post for each one of the articles. It has a title, post info, like this, posted by the author's name and so forth, wrapped with this div with a class of post info. And then the read more link and the comments link down at the bottom, they need to be wrapped in a div with a class of post meta. Once we do that, our CSS styles should apply appropriately to our nodes. So let's see how we can do that. The first thing that I'm going to do is over in my Drupal site, I'm going to navigate to Drupal's node module. Under modules, node, and I'm going to copy this node.tpl.php file from Drupal core into my theme. So I copy the node template file into sites, all, themes, 960 robots, and just place it in there. Remember to copy these files and not move them, because if you move the files out of Drupal core, they won't exist there any longer. As long as we make a copy of it and then clear the cache on our site, Drupal will use our version of the node template file every time it shows a node when using the 960 robots theme. So the next thing we'll want to do is make sure that we clear the cache on our site. And go to the Performance tab, click Clear All Caches, and then go back and view my page. And initially, this isn't going to look any different, because all we've done is copy the default template file. However, I can now go ahead and start making changes to this node template file and see those reflected in my theme. And just to prove that this is working, I'm going to add a little bit of text to our template file. I can save it, and if I go back to our site and click refresh, we should see this text, "This is an example," show up for every node when it's rendered. On the home page, it should show up for each one in the list of nodes. This is an example, here it is again, and again, once for each node. And if I click through to view the article itself, I should see it on that page as well, right here up at the top. Great, so now I know Drupal is using my node template file instead of the default one that comes with Drupal core. Let me go back to the home page. So the next thing we'd like to do is start modifying the node template file to match the HTML that was provided to us in our index.html. I can remove my testing code here. I'm going to open up my index.html file once more, just so I can have it as a reference when making changes to the node template file. There we go. I've got my index.html, and I can take a look here at what I'm trying to emulate in my node template file. So the first thing I probably want to do is make sure that all of the content of my node is wrapped in a div with a class of post. If I switch back over here and take a look, we can see in our node template file that the entire contents of the node here is already being wrapped with this div. What I'd like to do is make sure that this div has a class of post applied to it so that it matches the HTML in our index.html file. Before I get too far into that though, let's take a look at this line number 81 here. This line contains a mix of HTML and PHP. What you see here is HTML with small snippets of PHP inside of it. I know these are snippets of PHP because I have an opening and closing PHP tag here, and then the code print, and this is printing out the unique ID of our node. And then it closes the PHP and switches back to HTML for this portion here. It starts a class attribute in our div tag, and then inside of that it starts PHP again. It says open the PHP, start processing, print out this classes variable, and then close PHP and switch back to HTML. And it does that again for the attributes here. In this case, the classes variable here contains a number of different classes that are added to the node template file by other modules in Drupal. This allows modules to add contextual classes to the node so that people could, in theory, theme the node content without actually having to come and modify the HTML at all. This might contain things like what type of node this is, whether the user that's viewing it is logged in or not, and so forth, making it easy to target it with CSS. Here though, we're also applying a class without using the classes variable, just regular HTML, this class of clearfix. For now, I'm just going to add the class of post to the list as well. So now what we would get, the class attribute on this div will be equal to whatever the classes are inside of this classes variable provided by the templating system, plus our new class of post, plus the class of clearfix that was already there. If I go ahead and save that, and switch back to the site, and I hit refresh, you notice a couple of things. First, our example text was removed. The other thing that adding that post class did is ensure that we get proper spacing around the content of our nodes. Before I added that class, this content, like the image and the content down here, was bumped up against the left. Now we've got a margin in between the edge of the page and our actual content. In order to verify that that new class of post is being applied, I'm also going to inspect the HTML here, just to make sure. I'll do inspect element, and take a look at the HTML that's being output. If I look at the div here, I can see my div with the ID of node 48, and it has my new post class applied to it. You can see here post is part of the classes. You can also see all of the classes that are being applied to this div as part of that $classes variable. It's got a class of node and node-article, so I know that this particular node is a node of type article. If it were a page node, this would probably be node-page. I also know that this node is promoted to the front page, and that I'm viewing it in the teaser version at the moment. Lots of contextual information that can be used to target these nodes in specific cases, like the front page or if it's promoted and so forth. So great, my post class is being applied. The next thing I'd like to do is take a look at how we can adjust this submitted by line up at the top to reflect what it shows in our index.html. As a refresher, let's take a look at our index.html. Once I get that opened up, I can see a couple of differences. First off, inside of our design mockup, we've got the words posted by and then the author name here, and then a pipe character, and then it says filed under and lists all of the tags for this article. The text that's not linked here is also grayed out. So the words posted by and filed under are slightly grayed out, and then links are shown as just solid black. Versus, in our current Drupal theme, we've got the word submitted by instead of posted by. And we're showing the date here as well, which wasn't part of what was in our design comp. So let's take a look at fixing that. If I switch back over to my node template file, I can scroll down and see here, this is where it's printing out that submitted by information. It looks to me like the variable $submitted here actually contains all of the information that I'm seeing. It shows this here contains that post submitted by, the author name, and the date. So it's a lot of information. What I'd like to do is actually replace this with my own text and then just the user's name. One of the benefits of copying this template file right from Drupal core into our theme is that we've already got all of the documentation up at the top of this file for what variables are available inside of this template file. If I take a look at some of the variables that are shown here, I can see that one of them is this $name variable. It says the themed username of the node's author output from the function theme username. So this tells me that this variable $name is going to contain the name of the user who authored the post. Since it's run through theme username, I know that it's probably going to be linked to the user's profile, if they have one, and if the currently logged in user has permission to view the profile. So I'm going to go ahead and use that, $name. So if I scroll back down, the first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of this line, print submitted. And instead, I'm going to say posted by, open the PHP, print the $name variable, and then close this PHP statement. I can save that. And if I switch back to my site real quick and refresh, you can see that it's now gotten rid of that long string of text that contains submitted by and the date and so forth, and it now just says posted by and then the name of the person that created this node. This one's authored by the anonymous user, but if we scroll down and look at some others, you can see this one here was authored by admin, and it's linked to that user's name and so forth. Great. The other thing that I need to do is make sure that the HTML surrounding this string matches what it does in my index.html so that the CSS that I've already got will make it look like I want it to. If I take a look again at the index.html file real quick, you can see here that the posted by and the filed under lines here are wrapped with a div that has a class of post-info. And if I look at my node template file, it looks like that div currently has a class of submitted. All I'm going to do is just change that word submitted to post-info, click save, and when I refresh the page, I can see that this is, just by looking at it, that class is now being applied. You can see the text got grayed out, the link changed to be a solid black, and so forth. If I inspect it again, I can see that that particular div does indeed have a class of post-info. If I open up that div to see what's inside of it, I can see my text that I entered, posted by, and then continue to dig in a little bit, and I can see the value of that $name variable is actually this content here, the span, this anchor tag, and the user's name here linked to the user profile. I'm going to close this and switch back to my node template file. One thing that I wanted to point out in the node template file, we're not actually going to make any changes to this section because we don't need to. Our posts are already using h2 for their title elements in the index.html, but I did want to point out this line here where it says if not $page. The variable here, page, is a Boolean value of true or false. What it's telling me is whether or not this particular node is being viewed in a teaser context or a full page context. For clarity, if I switch over and look at the site, all of these nodes that are listed on the front page right now are being viewed in the teaser context, a sort of shortened version of my node. Once I select any particular node and go to that node's page, like node/28, what I'm now seeing is the full page version of the node. So not the trim teaser version, the full page version. When I'm on this page, that's when the $page variable in my node template file is set to true. So in this case, what I'm doing is saying, if I am not viewing the node in the context of a page, go ahead and print out the node's title. However, if I'm viewing the node in a context of a page, don't print out the node's title. The reason for that is that in Drupal, when I'm viewing a node, the title of the node is set to the actual page title. And that's the title that's printed out by our page.tpl.php, which we saw in the previous chapter. I don't want to print that out twice when I'm viewing the node in teaser context, so I say, if it's in the teaser context, print out the node. If it's in the full page content, just skip this. There's also these additional render title prefix and render title suffix lines. What these are doing is giving other modules the opportunity to insert additional content right before and right after the title. Most notably, this is used by the contextual links module in order to insert the HTML that's necessary to render those contextual links that appear in the gear icon when you're viewing a node in teaser mode. Important thing to remember to place these inside of your node template file. Otherwise, you're potentially breaking that contextual links functionality. There's a couple of other things I'd like to do inside of this node template file. For right now, what I'd like to do is make sure that this line down here, render content links, has the appropriate div wrapping around it. This line right here is what's responsible for printing out the read more link and that link to the comments and the number of comments. If we take a look at our home page again, it's this line right here. Read more, one comment, add a new comment. And if I look at our design mockup again, you can see that this has that nice gray box around it. I'd like to make sure that that's applied in our theme. In order to do that, I need to make sure that this is wrapped with the appropriate div. In our index.html file, I can see that that information at the bottom, read more, and the link to the number of comments here is wrapped in a div with a class of post meta. I'm actually just going to copy this line and switch over to my node template file. So I can see right here, I don't have that div in my template file. So I'm just going to add it. Once I've got that, I can save and flip back to our site. And when I refresh, you can see those styles are now being applied. And if I inspect that element, it's now got the additional div class equals post meta wrapping the unordered list that contains all of the links at the bottom of each post. Now that we know a little bit more about how renderable arrays work, I'd like to take a look at how we can move our taxonomy terms from down below in our content to right up here next to our author name. You scroll down and take a look real quick, you can see our tags are being printed out as part of the main content of this node, part of that $content variable. We're going to see how we can move them so they're not printed out here, but they're printed out up here in line with our author name instead. To do that, I'm going to switch back over to my template file, and I'm going to find the part in the template file where it's printing out that author name. It looks like that's right here, posted by, and then the author's name, inside of this div with a class of post-info. The taxonomy terms are currently being printed out as part of this $content variable. I want to print them out up here instead, so I need to add the code to do that. I'll go ahead and add that code, and then take a look at how this works. There's a couple lines here. This first line of PHP, what I'm doing is saying render $content, specifically the field_tags element. Those are my taxonomy terms. If there are any taxonomy terms attached to this node, it's going to render that to HTML and assign that HTML to this tags variable. After it's done that, it's actually going to set a flag on the field tags element inside of $content that says this element has already been rendered to HTML. Don't bother rendering it again. We'll talk more about that in a second. Immediately after that, I check to see, is there any content in this tags variable? And if there is, I go ahead and print out some additional content on the page. The pipe character followed by this text filed under, and then our actual tags. It's important to note that calling render on a specific element like this of field_tags is actually setting a flag on that element saying that it's already been printed out once, don't bother doing it again. And that way I can be assured that when I call print render on just the content variable as a whole and not a specific element, it's not going to try to render this field tags element a second time. It's already done it once and flagged it as having done so. If I ever did want to render that twice, or for some reason wanted it to show up again when I said render in the entire content variable, I could use the corresponding show function on this element. So I could say show and then content field tags right before I rendered it, and it would show up again. I'm going to save our template and switch back over to our site and refresh the page so we can see this in action. You can see that this article node, which has some tags attached to it, now has the text filed under, and underneath it are tags. It's showing the heading for that field right here, and then the tags linked to their term pages. If I scroll down below, you can see it's no longer printing out the terms at the bottom like it was before. That's great. It's not quite how I wanted it to look though. There's a couple of things that I can do to start to adjust this. One of them is get rid of this tags label. The tags here are actually a field, so this is something that I can control through the user interface. I can just go to Structure, Content Types, Manage the Display, And I'm just going to tell it to hide that label from our field. Save that. Now when I go back, it's no longer going to display the label tags, but it's still got our tags not quite in line with the rest of it. If I inspect the HTML here to see what's going on, you can see that these tags actually have a lot of additional HTML that I probably don't need if I'm just trying to display them in line with the author's name there. Here's our tags. It's inside of a div with the name of field items, and each individual tag is inside of a div of its own, this field item div, and then you can see the tag itself, the anchor, and so forth. Probably all I really need in this case are the anchor tags. If we look at the template file, all of that HTML content is actually coming just from calling this function here, render, on the content field tags element, and all of the properties of this field tags are telling it to be rendered out as that set of HTML tags. This is something that you can change, however it's a little more complex than we're going to get into right now. We'll talk about that later in another chapter. In this chapter, we've taken a look at how you can override the node template file inside of your theme, effectively changing the HTML that's used for every node when it's output on the screen. It's important to keep in mind how this template file plays with the page template file. If you remember our presentation from earlier in the series, we saw this slide, which showed the page template file and said the page template file is responsible for the content that is the entirety of the page. Things like the wrapping divs around the entire page, the header, the footer, each div that wraps a region, like the content region or our sidebar regions. Inside of that page template file are other template files, like the region template files, or in this case, the node template files. The way that this system works is that Drupal renders the content starting from the inside and working outwards. So what it does is it first says, I'm going to display a bunch of nodes on the page. I'm going to render each one of those nodes to HTML using the node template file. Once I've done that, I'm going to pass the rendered HTML to the region template file, which will render the region to HTML and print out the content of all the nodes inside of that region. I'm then going to pass the region's HTML to the page template file, and the page template file prints out anything that wraps the region and the contents of the entire region, which in this case also contains our nodes. If we look at the page template file once again, you'll remember that we added this line here as one of the first things to replace static content with dynamic content from Drupal. We said print render and then $page content. This is rendering that main content region, which contains all of our nodes. So all of that work that we've done inside of the node.tpl.php, and it gets turned, when those nodes get turned into HTML, they become part of this page content element here and then print it out. In order to see how this works, it might be helpful to add a debug statement so we can inspect that page variable again. We're going to use the kpr function and just say page. We'll just print out the content element. We don't need everything else because we're just interested in what's inside of this content key on the array. So kpr and then the page variable content element. If I switch back to my site and hit refresh, you can see I've now got this debug output of the contents of that array. Inside of it, we've got this element of system main, and inside of that system main element, you can see are the nodes that are being displayed. In this case, it's just displaying one node. Because we're on the page for node/48, we got one node being displayed. The way that this works is when we call the render function on the page content element, it starts from the inside of this array and renders it outwards. So it starts with this node here, number 48, and uses the node template file in order to render this node to HTML. That node is then passed back up to the block. The block is rendered using the block template file. That block is then handed off to the region, and the region is rendered using the region template file. The HTML from the region then gets passed all the way back up to the page, and that's what's printed out here as the full HTML for the page that we're seeing.